So we got the avatar component extracted out of user info. This thing is the sign out button, which isn't even showing up right now because it's using Font Awesome, but we haven't added Font Awesome. Have we talked about Font Awesome? Okay, I thought so. So we haven't ever added it though, so it's not working. So let's see if we can remember how to do that. Let's see. Font Awesome. How to use. Free. All. Here's that's our URL for web fonts and CSS, which we've learned is not as good for accessibility. So we'll do the SVG and JS version. There we go. I get a little script tag here. Let's copy that script tag. Then I'm actually going to add this all the way back to index.html, the one actual HTML file in here. So I'll just throw it right inside the head. Here's that script tag coming at you in Slack. Just throw it inside the head of index.html. And index.html is not in your source directory, but in the public directory. But was it just the afternoon class that I told about Command P, how I switch files quickly? Did I tell you guys about that? Okay, yeah, it was just the afternoon class. So you may notice I switch files very quickly. I don't use the sidebar because that's real slow. I hit Command P or Control P, and then you can start typing any part of the file name. So in this case, I could just start typing HTML, and it's the only HTML file there is. I just go straight to it. If I want to go to app.js, Command P, app. There we go. Want to go to message list, Command P, mlist. How's that? Yeah, that'll do. So just start typing any piece of the file name, and you can switch there really quickly. So that's Command P on a Mac, Control P on other platforms. I highly, highly recommend you get used to that keyboard shortcut because it'll save you a ton of time. It works in Atom and Sublime Text as well. There are even plugins to use it in Vim. So I'm hoping what that did for us is made the icon show up. It did, but it's blue on dark blue-gray, so it doesn't look very good. But there it is. So that's the sign out button. And I kind of want to make it a separate component. It sort of feels like it should be, or at least it could be. So let's do it. Let's make a new component. Call it capital S sign, capital O out, capital B button, SignOutButton.js. The temperature's already gone up about 10 degrees. Is it still loud out there, James? Can you check? Can you open the door real quick and see if it's still loud? Is it? Curse those rascals. Yeah, try that.
I can hear them already.
Those cussers. It's going to be 1,000 degrees in here. All right, anyway. So part of why I'm doing this, back in userinfo.css, I saw there was these styles. These styles only apply to that button, and it's got the hover trick here, which we haven't learned about. So I'm just going to do this as its own separate component. That'll make it a little easier to style in one place. So again, I don't think it needs to be a class, so I'll just import React from React. So I'll say const sign out button equals arrow function. It'll need to return some JSX. When I'm done, I'll export default sign out button. And what we need is this link right here. I'll just cut it out of here, paste it in here. It's really more of a button than a link. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it from a href to just a button. Feels better to me. And it's got that icon in it. So back here, I can import it in user info. Import sign out button from /sign out button. It goes right here, sign out button. Cool. Okay, there it is. It's all buttony looking now, and I want to put some styles on it so it's less buttony looking. So let's see what we have over here. I got some styles here. Let's see what we can do about this. Okay, const styles equals an object. I'll throw some of these in there. Hold down Alt to put in more cursors. Backspace over the semicolons, make them commas. Camel case that. Camel case that. Put quotes around these. The numbers are fine. 0 and 0. But the rest of these need to be quoted. And then to actually apply that, my button needs style equals styles. And it's less buttony looking. I think I also want the cursor, though, to turn into the cursor to be pointer. There we go. I like that better. So now it looks a little more like we wanted it to look. So I'll paste this into Slack. But I don't think we're quite done. In the static project, there was a hover pseudo class here. Look at the static version in the browser, and you'll see as we hover over that, color lightens up, right? So we haven't ever talked about hover before, right? We haven't talked about pseudo classes, right? We have talked about pseudo classes, at least briefly in the other project. So things like this. It's basically a class that gets added automatically based on the state of the element. This is just something that's built into CSS, right? So they're marked with colons instead of dots, and that just means a link that you are hovering over. So we need to be able to say the same thing over here. But you can't do that kind of thing with inline styles. And that's the way this style prop works. If you look at it in the browser, the way these style props work is they end up just putting the style, here's the border. It just puts a style attribute on there with a bunch of inline styles. And you can't use a hover pseudo class or something on an inline style. We need real CSS for this. So we could totally just add a rule to app.css or even make our own SignOutButton.css and just import it and just use CSS. But the whole CSS in JavaScript thing is worth exploring. And I said there were lots of ways to do it. There are several libraries for it. So far, we've been using what I said was the easiest way, which is just inline styles inside a style prop. But we could use one of the third-party libraries for this, and that would give us access to things like hover. So I'll show you that real quick. Again, many, many libraries for this. A lot of blog posts out there that you're welcome to look up if you're curious. The one I'm going to use is called Aphrodite. I like it. It's pretty good. Here's a link to the GitHub page for it. Framework agnostic CSS and JavaScript with support for server-side rendering, browser prefixing, and minimum CSS generation. So it uses actual CSS instead of inline styles, which lets us do a lot more stuff that you can't do with inline styles, including things like responsive design, using media queries. If you've ever heard of responsive design, that's kind of reformatting things based on the width of the window. When the window gets below a certain threshold, you might see a menu change to from being shown all the time to being hidden under the little hamburger icon, that kind of stuff. And it supports pseudo selectors like hover, active, etc. So to use this, we need to add it. It is called Aphrodite. The README here says npm install -- save Aphrodite. Since we're using yarn, that is just yarn add Aphrodite. I'll throw that in Slack as well. Yarn add Aphrodite. If I can type it twice. Now what yarn add and npm install both do is they not only download that package and put it in your node modules folder, but they also automatically add it to your package.json. Now it's listed in my dependencies, Aphrodite. Because remember, node modules isn't actually going to get committed. We don't add that stuff to our repository. So other people who clone our code need to have all the same dependencies. So when they run yarn install the one time, it's going to get everything that's in package.json. So when you do yarn add to add an individual package, it automatically adds it to the package.json. So it will be a permanent part of the project. So they have some videos on here if you want to learn more about it. But here's a quick example. It looks like they import two things from Aphrodite, style sheet and CSS. So I'll import those at the top of SignOutButton, pasting this in Slack as well. So we import style sheet and CSS, which are both named imports inside curly braces, from Aphrodite. Again, looking at their example, what they do, they have this style object down here again. But instead of just an object, they call stylesheet.create and pass the object as an argument to that. So our style's down here. I'll just wrap that inside stylesheet.create. And what Aphrodite will do is I actually add a style tag to the document so it can use real CSS. And it will actually define a class out of all of these. It'll auto-generate a class with a randomly generated name. So then what we need to do is we need to apply that class to the appropriate elements. So instead of just using a style prop, what we'll do is actually use class name. But how do we know the name of that class? It was auto-generated, right? That's what the other import is for. We imported style sheet so we could create the style sheet down here. And we import this CSS function for this part. If we say CSS, open parens, and pass in the style object, so styles, yeah, just styles. That function will return the class name that stylesheet.create auto-generated. If we do it right, which I didn't. What did I do wrong? I think you can't just have one object. I think you have to have some keys in here. So what is all this applying to? This is all applying to the button, right? So button colon, and then all these styles. So styles dot button is what I'm trying to do here. So for every key inside the object that you pass to stylesheet.create, it'll auto-generate a new CSS class. To find out what that class is, you just pass that object to this CSS helper function that you import from Aphrodite. And the effect right now is that it looks just like it did before. But because we're using Aphrodite, we can do things like the hover pseudo class. And the example it gives here, you can kind of see that, or in some of these examples you can see it. But this is what you do. So we want the hover pseudo class on this button. Inside that rule, we just put the string :hover as a key. So the string :hover, and then whatever we want to apply when we're hovering over this. I think it was just color white. Yeah, color white. Color colon the string white. And there we go. Now we have our hover effect. So it's not really any harder than doing it the other way. It's just different. We have to import a couple things. Style sheet and CSS from Aphrodite. Style sheet we use to actually define the styles down here inside stylesheet.create. And then that CSS is a function that we use inside class name, because stylesheet.create will automatically generate actual CSS classes, but we don't know the names of them because they ensure that they're unique. That way we could use the same one inside lots of different components, but they would still be specific to that component. Because every time you call stylesheet.create, you're going to get a brand new class name. So we don't use the style prop anymore, we use class name for this. So we'll use Aphrodite on the components where we think it's necessary because we have hover effects and things like that. So here's this entire component when I'm done with it. What do we do? I'll make a separate commit for actually adding Aphrodite here. So I'll hit add next to package.json and yarn.lock and say add Aphrodite package for CSS in JS. And then I'll say, oh, here, this is where we added font awesome. So hit plus on index.html, add font awesome. And then add SignOutButton component. If you want to do it all in one commit, that's fine. But remember that you can do that. You can add a file at a time. Yeah, Yamini. Okay.